The sun rose like an old promise over the desert, washing the hills in pale gold and sorrow. Dust drifted slow through the air, catching light like ash from a dying fire. A man rode through it, his wrists bound, his shadow long and quiet across the sand. The clinking of his spurs echoed softly, lonely as a church bell at dawn. They said every man rides toward his own judgment. And this morning, Eli Thornton was riding toward his ahead. The town of Dry Creek waited, its windows squinting in the sunrise, the air thick with dust and curiosity. Sheriff Amos Kearney led the way, an old friend wearing the badge that now divided them. Behind him rode Deputy Ross Harlan, young and eager, his posture stiff with pride and righteousness. Between them, Eli sat silent on his mare, Marigold, her chestnut coat glimmering under the rising light. She moved slow, as if she knew this was their last ride together. 2 days before, Eli had stepped into the general store for salt and flour, and conversation had died mid-breath, eyes turned. A woman at the counter whispered behind her hand, "That's him, the one who shot his neighbor's bull. Can't keep his temper, that Thornton." Another man snorted, "And now he's crying poor." Eli had said nothing. Truth doesn't travel far in a town built on gossip. He had only shot the animal to keep it from trampling his dying herd. A desperate mercy, mistaken for cruelty. But rumor has sharper teeth than any law. He left the store empty-handed, heart heavy, shame like lead. Marigold waited outside, her reins hanging loose. She looked at him with those soft, patient eyes that had watched his world crumble piece by piece. Eli stroked her mane. "Ain't no soul left here who remembers what we were, girl." That night, the wind howled through the shutter gaps, carrying faint laughter from the saloon. Eli sat by the window, staring at the cold fields that once fed half the county. Then came a knock. Clara Wynne stood there, shawl pulled tight, a basket of bread in her hands. Her face was gentle but unsure, her eyes flickering between kindness and fear. She was the widowed schoolteacher, quiet, steady, a woman the town still pitied. "I thought you might need supper," she said softly. Eli hesitated, then stepped aside. "I don't need charity. It's not charity," she said. "It's bread." They sat at his table, neither saying much. The ticking of the old clock filled the silence. When she finally rose to leave, she said, almost to herself, "I don't believe the stories, Eli." "Then you're the only one," he replied. Her eyes met his, a moment long enough to burn and fade. That was the last time he saw her before the law came. At dawn the next morning, hooves echoed through the valley. Sheriff Amos approached the ranch, his hat low against the wind. He carried no anger, only duty. Behind him rode Ross, the young deputy whose stare was all judgment. "Eli," Amos said quietly, "you know why I'm here?" Eli nodded, eyes hollow. "Reckon I do." Ross unrolled a paper, the ink still fresh. "You're charged with unlawful killing and trespass. You'll ride with us to Dry Creek." Eli didn't argue. He looked toward the corral where Marigold stood waiting. "Let me ride her," he said. "One last time." Amos hesitated, then nodded. "One last time?" Ross scoffed. "Mercy for criminals, that's why this town rots." Amos shot him a look. "That's enough." They rode out beneath a copper sky, the air dry and trembling with heat. The plains opened wide before them, and the silence between the three men was heavier than any chain. Each hoofbeat sounded like a heartbeat counting down. Eli's gaze wandered to the far hills, where his wife was buried beneath a crooked willow. He thought of her laughter before the drought took her, before the bank took their cattle, before he lost himself trying to hold on to what had already gone. He whispered to Marigold, "Maybe we both been punished long enough, old girl." The trail bent through canyons where wind hummed low, like a hymn sung for no one. Eli remembered being a boy, his father teaching him how to break horses, not with rope, but with patience. "Don't fight what's scared," his father had said. "Show it you ain't gonna leave." Those words clung to him now, softer than prayer. As the sun began to dip, dark clouds gathered to the east. A storm was coming fast, and Amos called out, "We'll shelter at Willow Creek Barn." Ross frowned. "That old place?" Locals say it's cursed. Locals say a lot, Amos muttered. The barn stood lonely against the storm, half collapsed, its doors hanging crooked, the roof patched with rust. Inside smelled of old hay and rain, time layered thick in the air. They lit a lantern, its glow trembling against the boards. Outside, thunder rolled. The wind howled through the cracks like a restless ghost. Marigold stamped her hooves and snorted, uneasy. Eli laid a hand on her neck, feeling her pulse quicken beneath his palm. Then, a strange sound. A hollow knock under her hooves. Marigold pawed the dirt again, harder this time. The boards shifted. "What's that?" Ross barked, hand moving to his pistol. "Easy," Amos said. "Let's see." Eli knelt down, brushing away the dirt. Lightning flashed, white and sharp. Beneath the floorboard, something glimmered faintly. Metal, buried deep. He dug with his bare hands until his nails split. Slowly, a rusted tin box emerged, sealed tight, its edges green with age. Ross stepped forward, suspicious. "What are you hiding, Thornton?" Eli stared at the box. "Nothing I ever knew of." Amos crouched beside him, face grave. "Let's open it." The storm outside cracked the sky open, rain hammering down as Eli pried the box apart. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a silver locket, a few letters, and an old marshal's badge, tarnished but still gleaming faintly in the lamplight. The initials etched on its back read, J.T. Eli looked up. "Jeremiah Tully?" he whispered. The name carried weight. The town's missing marshal vanished 20 years ago without a trace. Ross sneered. "Old junk. Ghost stories?" But Amos's voice trembled. "That badge belonged to the man who ran Dry Creek before me." Outside, the storm roared louder, the barn shuddering with wind. Eli's hands tightened around the locket. He felt something shift deep inside. Not fear, not hope, but the first spark of a truth that had been buried too long. Marigold stood still now, calm as if she understood what she'd unearthed. Eli whispered to her, "You found something, didn't you, girl? Something the land wasn't done telling." The lightning flashed again, painting them all in white fire, the rancher in chains, the sheriff with sorrow in his eyes, the deputy shaking his head in disbelief, and the horse who had just kicked open the past. The storm howled. The land waited. And Eli Thornton, once broken by rumor, felt, for the first time in years, the faint stirring of purpose. The barn smelled of rain and ghosts. The storm pressed against its walls like a living thing, thunder crawling through the rafters as the three men stared at the opened tin box on the ground. Sheriff Amos Kearney turned the old badge over in his calloused hand, his face pale under the flickering lantern light. "J.T.," he whispered. "Jeremiah Tully. He vanished before I ever pinned on a star." Deputy Ross scoffed, the sound sharp as glass. "You're telling me this is that old legend? That he just buried himself in Thornton's barn?" Eli said nothing. He was still kneeling in the dirt, the stormlight cutting through the gaps in the walls, painting stripes of gold across his face. He could feel something shifting inside him, something old, something that had waited to breathe. He unfolded one of the damp letters. The paper trembled in his fingers. The ink was faded but still legible, scrawled in a hand that carried both guilt and haste. The words were addressed to Clara Wynn's grandfather, Thomas Wynn, dated 20 years back. "Thomas, I've done wrong by you. I framed your friend Caleb for those missing cattle. I needed the money, and the law would have hanged me if I confessed. But I can't live with it. The badge ain't clean anymore. I'll bury what I've done near Willow Creek. Maybe someday the land will tell the truth for me." Eli's heart stumbled in his chest. The story sounded familiar. A good man framed, a town too proud to listen. History had folded itself into a cruel circle, and he'd been caught right in the middle. "Clara's kin," Eli murmured. "Her family lived here long before any of us." Amos took the letter gently. His voice cracked like old leather. "Jeremiah Tully confessed to the same crime you're accused of." Ross shook his head, scorn thick in his tone. "Could be a fake. Thornton's smart enough to stage this." Eli met his eyes, tired but steady. "If I was that smart, I'd be anywhere but here." Rain softened outside, the storm breathing its last sigh. Amos stood up slowly. We're taking this to town. Folks deserve to hear the truth, whatever it turns out to be. They rode through dawn mist, the desert washed clean. The world felt raw, alive, and heavy with new air. Marigold walked without hurry, her steps steady. Eli's wrists were still bound, but inside, something unshackled itself. For the first time in years, he wasn't just carrying guilt, he was carrying evidence. Dry Creek came into view, the morning light spilling across the rooftops. Word spread fast. By the time they reached the square, a crowd had gathered. Faces that once turned away now leaned forward, curious, uneasy. Clara Wynne stood near the post office steps, hands folded, shawl drawn tight against the morning chill. When her eyes found Eli, there was no fear, only a trembling kind of faith, as if she had known all along that something buried would rise. Amos mounted the saloon steps and faced the crowd. He held up the rusted badge and the letter, his voice carrying low but firm. 20 years ago, Marshal Jeremiah Tully disappeared. Some said he was murdered, others said he ran. But this here, he raised the letter, is his own confession. He framed a rancher, stole cattle, and buried his guilt where no one would find it. Until this man's horse did. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eli stood still beside Marigold, the rope still around his wrists, dust clinging to his boots. Ross pushed forward. You gonna take the word of a dead man and a criminal? Amos turned to him, eyes full of weary fire. You think justice is just hanging the next poor fool who looks guilty? We've made that mistake before. He paused, his voice quieter. We judged one man twice for the same sin, and both times we were wrong. The murmurs faded into silence. Someone in the crowd coughed. Then slowly, Amos stepped down and unfastened the rope from Eli's wrists. The leather fell away with a soft snap. Eli rubbed his hands, numb with disbelief. Freedom didn't feel light. It felt hollow, like something earned too late. The townsfolk couldn't meet his eyes. Clara stepped forward, the wind lifting her hair. She said nothing, just looked at him like she had before, with quiet certainty that never needed words. Eli turned to Amos. What happens now? Amos sighed. That's up to you. He could have walked away then, ridden beyond the desert, left Dry Creek to its whispers. But something held him. He looked around at the town, the church, the schoolhouse, the fields long dry, and he realized this place was still his, even if it had never been kind. I'll stay, he said, his voice rough with dust and mercy. Not to rebuild what I lost. To mend what's left? Amos nodded once, eyes glassy. Then maybe this town still has a chance. Marigold nudged Eli's shoulder, warm breath against his neck, as if to remind him that redemption doesn't ride fast. It walks beside you, steady and sure. Days passed. The town quieted. People began stopping by the ranch again, not to gawk, but to help. A hammer here, a sack of seed there. Clara came each morning with her sleeves rolled up, helping mend fences and sweep the porch. Sometimes they talked. More often they didn't. Silence had become their shared language. The gossip that once poisoned the air turned into softer talk, of forgiveness, of second chances. The wind carried it gently through the valley, almost shyly. One evening, Eli sat beneath the willow tree where he'd buried the old locket. The setting sun burned red over the plains. He opened his hand and found a small coin he'd kept from the tin box, a silver one stamped faintly with J.T. He smiled faintly. Guess you finally told the truth, old lawman, he said. Took a while, but the land don't forget. He buried the coin beside the locket, pressing the soil firm. You're forgiven, he whispered. So am I. The days turned gentle again. Dry Creek began to breathe differently, as if the whole town had loosened its collar. Then came the morning of his final ride. The sky was pale gold, the kind of light that hums with quiet promise. Clara stood on the porch, arms wrapped around her shawl, watching as Eli saddled Marigold. The mare flicked her tail, eager and calm. You heading out far? Clara asked. Just a ways, he said, smiling faintly. Want to see what the horizon looks like when you're not running from it? She nodded, eyes glistening. Don't be long. He tipped his hat. Wouldn't dream of it. He rode out slow, the world glowing with that early sun that makes everything seem forgiven. The same ridge he once crossed in chains now lay open before him, soft and wide. At the hilltop, he stopped and looked back. The town shimmered small and golden in the distance, the church steeple, the windmill, the faint figure of Clara standing by the fence. For the first time, he didn't feel like a ghost among the living. He breathed deep, the air tasting of rain and dust and something sweeter, peace. Maybe every man deserves one last ride, he murmured. Not to escape, but to return. Marigold's ears flicked forward. She shifted her weight, sniffing at the ground. There, half buried in the dirt, something caught the light. A silver coin, twin to the one he'd buried. It glinted like a wink from the past. Eli chuckled softly. Guess the land's still talking, girl. He leaned forward and gave her a gentle nudge. Come on, then. Let's ride home. They moved together into the horizon, the sun swallowing their silhouettes until only dust and light remained, and as the narrator's voice fades like wind through the grass, maybe redemption ain't a gift. Maybe it's a trade. A man gives his shame to the land, and the land gives him back his name. And when he learns to forgive the world that broke him, the world forgives him right back. The wind carried that truth across the open plains, soft and endless, as if whispering it to anyone still listening.